Good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Shabazz here, and today I'm going to be covering material from chapters 6 and a briefing on 7. I have a couple of things to share with you, most notably an article that I always share with my class of a friend of mine that I met when I was in Egypt on my first trip overseas. And it's a very important article, not only because he was my dear friend, but because of the impact and the impression that it made on my own thinking in terms of political systems and international politics. So, I will also show you a video. When we get toward the end of chapter 6, I'll show you a video on these egregious copyright infringements. And as I said in the last class, you'll be surprised at how brazen some people are, and they take liberties to others' property in terms of making a profit off of somebody else's intellectual property. And of course, there are protections against that, and we'll be exposed to some of the laws that will protect you if you're in another country and you have a business there. Now, again, that is in writing, and it is up to the government to enforce those IP laws or intellectual property laws. So let's begin talking about this idea of legal and political environment. So different international business books or global business books cover this section differently. But this book covers it similar from the last textbook, which basically gives you the idea of political systems in polar extremes, which means that they give you democracy and they give you totalitarianism. Now, democracy is touted as being the ideal political system. And there was once an Aesop fable of a man and a lion. And you probably know the fable. The fable is that there was a man and a lion, and they were walking through the forest, and they came upon a statue. And that statue had was depicting a man with a rifle victorious over a lion. And he had his foot on top of the lion. And the man says to the lion, see, the man is superior to the lion. And so the lion responded that, well, if that was a lion that made the statue, then the lion would have slain the man and had his paw on it. So the moral of the story is what is being represented depends on who is actually the author or the creator of that reality. And so what I am saying is that democracy is touted as being the best system because those nations that are in positions of power at this point in time practice that system. And so you have kind of a very subjective view. And many of these textbooks are very subjective in terms of how they present political systems and also economic systems. They almost by default say that democracy is the best system. But I want to expose you to some, and you know I'm always an antagonist, right? If you haven't learned anything at this point, you may think that I'm just a rabble-rouser and that I always have something to say. But I do want to give you both sides of this question. And I want to just point you to this, and this is just a Google result, and I'm trying to get everything on the page so you can see it. You have these articles that are listed here, and some of them are pointing to journal articles that were written about this subject. Is democracy necessary for good governance? Is democracy necessary for sustainable development? Is democracy truly necessary for economic growth? Is democracy essential? Millennials increasingly aren't sure if democratic systems are the best systems. Why democracy doesn't deliver. This is out of Foreign Policy, a very influential magazine. The value of democracy. Is democracy necessary for good governance? Do democracy and capitalism really need each other? And you'll notice that in many systems, many of the countries that are very prosperous, you tend to have democracy and you tend to have capitalism. They're kind of kindred cousins. You might wonder why is that? Why do you have these two systems that are married to each other? Well, if you really think about it closely, you will know that democracy is about certain rights. You have amendments, you have certain freedoms, right? You have the freedom of speech, you have the right to bear arms, you have the regular elections, so you have the right to popular participation, is what it's called, the right to vote. You have the right to assembly, you can protest, you can do all of these things under a democratic system. And democracy is based on individual rights. Also, capitalism is based on individual freedoms because you have the right to start a business. You have the right to free enterprise. You have the right to choose between products or competitors. That's what a free market system does. It gives you options. And then there's fair competition. Then it is better for everyone because you have more choices. And if you have products that are not quality, then those will be fleshed out and you'll only have the best quality competing in that market. So both democracy and capitalism are based on individual freedoms. And so thus you have the marriage of the two. But democracy is a very diverse animal. And I'll just point to you a couple of sources here. And this article is pointing out the different types of democracy. So you have direct democracy, representative democracy, presidential democracy, parliamentary democracy, authoritarian, participatory, Islamic, social democracy, or democratic socialism, which is what you hear Bernie Sanders talking about quite a bit. And so you have a lot of different flavors of democracy. And I won't go through all these, but you get the point. The point is that there are different flavors, and one size does not fit all. America's type of democracy may not fit in other countries. In fact, not only will it not fit, it may be disastrous. So a lot of times you'll hear these politicians talking about the merits of democracy, and also when they go on their diplomatic missions, will make as a condition that this country democratize, or they have more freedoms as we have in America. But bear in mind, we're just talking about culture. Different countries have different cultures, they have different histories, they have different interactions, different relationships, different traditions, different customs. So to say that a country has to put American-style democracy or Western democracy on top of their own society is a bit of naivete and is being very presumptuous and even arrogant to do that. And I want to also show you, besides the 7 or 8 that we just saw, Now, you all are going to criticize me for this, but I am going to go to Wikipedia, and I don't normally go to Wikipedia except for quick and dirty when I just want to find something very quick and not to do anything very refined. I'm just, just going to try to find some information. That's what they call quick and dirty. It's nothing improper about that. Somebody tells you to just give me a quick and dirty, that means they just want a sketch. They just want something real quick. And so here you have types of democracy. Now this is, again, Wikipedia, and this is kind of user-driven information that's coming, and it is vetted, but it is very lightly vetted. It is kind of a cooperative vetting. But if you can look at all of these different types of democracy to the right-hand side, you'll see how countries have had to adapt democracy to suit their own specific needs. And some of these were mentioned in the previous article, but you can kind of see the levels of democracy here, types of democracy. Even they have democratic dictatorship. Okay, that's a very interesting one because it seems like an oxymoron that you can't be a dictatorship if you have democracy, right? Because the people decide who that leader is and what they do and what powers they have. But a dictator rules with sole authority over the people. So you have kind of a, like I said, an oxymoron. Those don't seem to go together, but it is a concept. So you see all of the different variations of democracy, and you have certainly a lot of applications. Some of the most prosperous countries in the world are socialist democracies, such as Sweden and Denmark and Norway. These countries have developed a more central model with the social services being provided by the government. There are actually elements of socialism in the society that we live in. Now, of course, our politicians may not want to discuss that, or they may not even want to admit that that is the case. But it is indeed the case that there are elements of socialism. We even have Social Security, right? We pay into a fund, and when we become of age 65, then we draw out of that fund for the rest of our lives. We also have public services. We have public education. We actually have an element of health care that now everybody has access. It's not totally socialized as you find in some countries. European countries, communist and socialist countries have socialized health care where everybody is allowed that right. So you have a right to health care. It is not a luxury, but it is a right that everyone should actually have the access to without all of the wrangling that we hear in politics these days. So let's go forward and talk about this legal and political environment. And here I just showed you all these levels of flavors of democracy, and here they give you a few. Democracy in general terms, and they put Greece as the kind of the model of democracy. I'm not sure I'll agree with that, but let's just take it for what it is. And they have rule by the people. So a pure democracy may be a situation where you have a government in which all citizens have popular participation or the right to vote. Athenian democracy is a pure form of democracy in which all adult citizens vote directly on matters affecting the community. So that means one person, one vote. Now, for the United States is a republic, but it has more of a representative democracy. Not a one person, one vote, although all the votes are counted. The votes actually go into an electoral college scenario, and that representative will cast a vote for that particular party. And typically, those officers of the electoral college are lifelong members of that party and entrusted to cast those votes as part of the electoral college. And as you may know and have heard, even in the last election, that just because you have the majority vote, it may not mean that you're going to carry the election. Hillary Clinton had 3 million more votes than President Donald Trump. President Donald Trump got the electoral vote. He got the majority of the electoral college votes and thereby was declared the winner of the election. And this has happened other times in history. Before that, it was Al Gore in 2000 who had more popular votes than George Bush. But George Bush got the electoral votes, most notably Florida, which was one of the last states to be counted because there was a controversy. And President Bush's brother was governor at the time, Jeb Bush. And there was a big controversy about some votes being discounted, and particularly in the African American community. And that was a big, big controversy. But those are two cases in which you had the electoral college that won the election as opposed to the popular vote. And then here you have totalitarian government, which is at the opposite end of the spectrum. So you've got this government which rules by force, essentially. It rules by conforming. You have to conform to a certain standard, and you are forced to conform to a certain standard. So it says here, a system of government in which individuals govern without the support or consent of the citizenry. For example, a military dictatorship. And certainly you could have a military dictatorship. You can have a lot of different types of dictatorships. Just as democracy is varied, so is totalitarianism. Military dictatorships can become from the form of a junta. A military junta can overthrow a government and then they can take control until elections are organized. And sometimes it ends up being the military leadership that ends up winning, and because of the they get the popular support, having overthrown somebody who was not as popular. So that's always a very sticky situation to get into when you have military taking over, because of course they rule in a different way, in more of a structure where everybody has to fit into a chain of command. So there's always skepticism when you have military leaders leading governments. So they break down a few more of these economic ideologies. So you have political ideologies and you have economic. Communism is, it says here, government or state owns and controls all major factors of production and is philosophically and economically classless society. Okay, that's a thumbnail sketch, but I will go further by saying that communism is a political system, it's an economic system, and it is a social system. It is all three into one. So the government controls the economic flow, it controls what is produced, who produces it, and how it's distributed. And you have a very heavy social safety net because you have collectivized healthcare, you have socialized healthcare, socialized education. And under communism, you may know that China is a communist nation, as was Russia, the Soviet Union. And they have a system of education that is government influence. Let me just put it that way. And that all the lesson plans and all the instructional materials are approved by the government. And so there is kind of a roadmap as to how you educate the citizen of this country. And everybody is expected to participate in this process. They're expected to participate in building this government. I've been to several nations that were under socialism and communism, and you'll notice that when you go to these countries, you'll see all of these slogans: work hard, be patriotic, and they're very inspiring if you look at them. I mean, just motivating. So when you go to Vietnam, you'll see these posters, these billboards. They're all over the place. You go to China, you go to Cuba. They have these relics of this kind of workers' rights, and which is how communism sprouted, because you have workers that wanted to assert their rights against the bourgeoisie. You may have heard of or used that word bourgeoisie as somebody who's bougie, somebody who's upscale, and who kind of is feeling themselves. You know, they feel that, okay, I'm important. But bourgeoisie is, of course, a French word, but in those times it meant that you had the ruling class. So they controlled the factors of production. They controlled the land. They were those that rented property, not only for living, but they rented property if you wanted to be a sharecropper and you wanted to till the soil, then you had to rent that land. And so the workers felt increasingly exploited, and so they rose up in the mid 1800s and started forming these workers' parties, which is the precursor to labor unions, and they started to rise up against the bourgeoisie. And so then you had this movement of that led into this idea that it would be the workers that would overthrow the bourgeoisie, and the government would belong to the people. So you would have no classes. Everybody would have equal opportunity to a wonderful life, to economics, to education, and to health. And so you have a classless society under communism. Socialism is a bit different, because the government plays a very strong role, but they also allow some freedoms. It says here the government plays a strong role in the economy and may own stakes in certain businesses, which is one aspect of it. But also, in some socialist governments, they allow entrepreneurs to operate at for profit. But it is the government that controls the major industries for the public. Capitalism, I might add that when we talk about communism, China is communist politically. So what are they economically? Well, they're capitalist. Even though they're communists, they have something which is called state capitalism. And they have figured out capitalism. And they have figured out a way to leverage the state apparatus or the government with capitalism. And so now they're able to exploit this capitalist system even better than the Western nations, the US, Europe, and even Japan to a degree. And so you have these, again, flavors of these different systems. So capitalism is a free market where you have low barriers to entry. You and I can start a business tomorrow or today. We can go online and get the paperwork and fill it out, and corporation papers, and send it in with the fee. And then in a couple of days, we've got our certificate, and then we can operate. And maybe it's not a couple of days, it might be a little longer than that, but certainly the barriers to entering this free market are low. The barriers to exit are low. There's also very little interference by the government. So, what happens in a free market capitalist system is you have buyers and sellers in this one market. And these buyers and sellers get together and their interactions. And that will determine to a great degree the activities that take place in this market. It will also affect supply, it will affect demand, and of course, price and quantity are also part of that equation. So here you have this free market system. Again, there are different types of all of these systems, but of course, capitalism is one of the systems that is touted around the globe as kind of the best way of living. But the arguments that the communists had against free market capitalism is that there are inefficiencies and there are wastes and that there is poverty. It creates classes. It creates situations where, for example, you go into a store and you want to buy some laundry detergent. You go down the aisle and you see 50 different types. So under communism, they would ask, why do you need 50 different types of detergent? You only need a handful, right? Because they all do the same thing. Well, of course, in this society, we have different markets. So you have Tide for bleach, you have Tide for colors, you have liquid, you have powder, you have little pods, you have detergent with no perfumes, you have eco-friendly plant-based detergent, you have obviously your other types of products, your spot cleaners, and all of these products, you go down the aisle and they obviously are selling because they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't be on that shelf if they weren't selling. And so that is the kind of the, when you talk about this free market system, there aren't any monopolies and then there's no price gouging. And so the market is self-corrective. And those who do well stay in business. Those who are not able to keep up drop off. And that's just the way it is. So what are some of the economic risk in a country? There are a lot of economic risks. If you're overseas, you have to deal with regulations, and we learned about that. So it says here that it obviously impacts the business environment. So some of the risks include restrictions on transfer or exchange of a country's currency or devaluation of the currency. When you're in a country, and I'll go through these relatively quickly. When you're in a country and let's say you make revenue, as a good corporate citizen, you might say, okay, I want to reinvest into the business and I want to create jobs. I want to build a good environment for the people in my community and also want to ensure that we stay in business, right? But sometimes a company may say, I want to send this money back to the headquarters, right? It's called repatriation of capital. Sometimes governments will give a limit. They will say you can only expatriate so much capital at a time. Because let's say you take all your bank deposits, you pull them out and you send them back to wherever you're headquartered. That creates a shock in that system because these banks rely on deposits so that they can make loans, and they can have make investments, and they can create a return on those bank deposits. And when you take that capital out, it creates a shock in the system, and it may create a crisis. And so that's why sometimes they have these limits as to how much money you can take out of the country. You have all of these other things. Questionable ability to repay loans. Obviously, that is an issue. Of course, being credit worthy and all of these things are very important when you talk about the risk incurred in providing startups with capital to be in a position to help the economy. It's always a risk. It's a risk here as well. HR and labor relations problems, people picketing, and all the things that come with being in that environment, inflation and corruption. Corruption is a big one because we have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, 1977 in this country, and we are forbidden. When we're in other countries, we are forbidden to give bribes or receive bribes. And bribes come in very creative ways. Doesn't have to be money. Doesn't have to be somebody giving you a physical gift or giving you something tangible. It can be intangible. It can be information. It can be access to an individual. It can be perhaps publicity that you're providing them on your platform. Yeah, these are all deal sweeteners, that come with that kind of environment. So that's why you have all of these different, you have a lot of different legislations against that. I want to show you something real quick before we go on. This website here is called Transparency International. So this is an organization that collects data on environments around the world. And I showed this to my other class, Transparency International. And they have all of this data about the ease of doing business in different places. And so here they have a map that's color-coded, and the darker the region is colored, the higher the incidences of corruption. And they also include these data tables. If I can find them on here. I had a couple of tables. This shows the rankings. You can see Denmark is at the top. They also have changes. So if you click on this tab, you can see where there have been changes, and it's very eye-opening to see countries change from year to year. And then they have a time series in terms of how they've progressed over the years. So this is a resource that you can use if you're actually looking to go overseas. You can do your due diligence before you go over to that foreign country, and kind of to get an idea to know what you're getting into. Okay, so here's a word for your lexicon: mitigate. What does it mean to mitigate risk? That means to lessen the chance of, or to lower the chance that an occurrence may happen. So you mitigate it. You mitigate your risk through careful planning, through your research, your marketing research, making sure you stay clear of politics, making sure that you get your insurance, your overseas insurance that will cover you in the case of product liability, will cover you in the case of property damage, will cover you even in the case of kidnapping. Believe it or not, there's insurance that will cover you in those cases. And of course, economic risks are not independent of political risk. Let's say you're in a country and you're a foreign business, right? And a political government, a political shift has changed from a government that was friendly to foreign businesses to one that is unfriendly to foreign businesses. And so you'll have a change in the atmosphere and perhaps more hostility aimed toward foreign businesses. And then you kind of have to adapt to that, the change in that environment. So you have political risk, macro political risk, which is large scale of affecting businesses throughout the country, micro political risk affecting industries or affecting individual entities. You have, of course, these different, I'm going to go back and show you this Overseas Private Investment Corporation. I was talking about insurance. This is one of the organizations that you could seek to be insured. Now, you know how insurance works, right? So you go to an insurance agency and you say, I want to be insured. What's your business? I am going over to this country and set up an outlet. And they say, okay, what's the country? And then you give them the name of the country. They pull out their tables. Because it's an insurance company, they have actuarial scientists that run all the numbers. But not only that, they'll pull out Transparency International, they'll pull out the Institutional Investor, they'll pull out all these ratings of countries. They'll look at credit ratings. Countries have credit ratings. They'll look at all of these various rankings of these countries. Based upon that, they will then assess what your premiums are based upon the risk of that country. If that country is deemed risky, then what does that mean? Insurance premiums are higher because you are at greater risk. And insurance companies are in the business of not paying. That's a bad thing to say because you would hope if I'm in an accident, or let's say somebody gets sick using my product and I'm sued, that, okay, my insurance company has my back, right? Well, you would hope so, unless the insurance company then asks you questions about the incident, and then they may find grounds that you were liable and that they're not going to pay the damages. And so you have to come out of pocket for that. That would be a bad thing. I know all of us have car insurance, and when you're in an accident and you talk to these insurance companies, I had an accident and finally made a claim after decades of driving, never had to make a claim. And this company gave me, I'm not going to mention the name, this company gave me a lot of problems. And I told them that I had been a customer since I was a teenager on my parents' policy, and that this is the first time I've ever made a claim. And so I kind of threw that on them, and okay, they got the message, and they dealt with me a little different after that. But yeah, that's the nature of insurance companies. They want to run the numbers, and they want to know how much of a risk that the venture that they're involved in is going to be, and they associate the premiums on that. Here you have another one of those charts, most dangerous countries in the world. I don't know what the criteria is. I don't know, how do you determine what the most dangerous country is? Is it by crime? Is it by, corruption? Is it bribery? What is it? How do you determine the most dangerous countries in the world? I don't have the footnote where usually they'll have a footnote and they'll kind of give you some idea. But as you can see, these are countries that either have had wars in the past couple of decades or have some level of instability in terms of their government apparatus. And this is some 7 years ago, so I would imagine you have some changes here. Now, corruption. We kind of have an idea of what corruption is, and it is defined here that where businesses are able to illegally alter relevant private and or public decision making by way of bribes, kickbacks, blackmail, extortion, and related activities. And the other thing in insurance is that if you get into a situation where you are accused of bribery and you are thrown in a jail, don't end up in a foreign jail, by the way, but if you do end up in a foreign jail, then that insurance should take care of whatever the bail is to get you out of that situation, and perhaps pay certain expenses in terms of that are related to you being incarcerated. So that's another level of protection to have if that in fact happens. But of course, we know what corruption is: private corruption, business corruption involving other private businesses, individuals, and groups; public corruption, making illegal payments to government officials, or engaging in blackmail, extortion, and all the other things. There is a difference in corruption. We're at the 40-minute mark, and so I'll go on for maybe about an hour, and then we'll stop there. Corruption varies from country to country. In the poor nations, people are struggling, so they're trying to survive. So what do? They go out and they hustle. Some of them sell goods on the street that they get from someone else, and you see them. Dozens of people in the street selling all kinds of items, just trying to make an honest living. But then you have others that are, frankly, hustling, and they have their scams. Certainly have scams, and some of it has to do with selling certain types of products that are not authentic products. Some of it has to do with black market, selling black market products, selling, dealing in black market currency, and people walking around with a wad of cash and actually offering to exchange money for you. Very unofficial channels, which you should make sure you avoid that, because you become a target. Especially these are people you don't know, and you don't know if they're working with someone else, and so it becomes a very precarious situation. So here you have transparency and international bribe payers, and you have Netherlands as being the most transparent. And you look, the United States is number 10. Now, I will also say that in those poor countries where you see open bribery, people see open bribes, right? You need something, and someone says, okay, I could do that for you, but... So they're asking, if you could break them off, like we say here. Hey, give me a little extra, and I'll make sure it happens. You will see this a lot in amongst the, and I hate to say it, but you go to some places and the police officers will make it their business to pull you over for little things, and maybe you have your paperwork in order, and they still want the dash money or the baksheesh, or they want money so you can go on about your way. And that is just the reality. I was watching a video of a young lady who moved to Ghana, and she had this YouTube video, was talking about the 5 things to beware of if you decide to move to Ghana from America. And she was saying one of the things that really struck her was this culture of bribes. To get things done, you need to pay people. People are making very little money in their regular jobs, and they engage what is called rent seeking. This is actually a term that's used, and they're hustling. They may have a job, but they're not getting paid much, so they're rent seekers, and so they want a little extra, or they want more. They want, in addition to what they already make, they want to pad their earnings. So let's see what else we have. We have the legal systems. Law is something that we respect in this country. Some of you will become lawyers, and some of you will become corporate lawyers, and you'll be on some of these cases. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV. You got these TV lawyers, and it's interesting that in some marketing campaigns you have TV doctors and TV lawyers that pitch products as if they're authentic. which is ironic because then you grow up, you believe that person because they play a doctor on TV, but they're not a real doctor. But again, that's marketing. That's another class, but it's just interesting. It just came to my mind. But civil law is different because it's heavily codified, which means that if there's an infraction of the law, they will say, based on this infraction, we'll look up the code that corresponds with the infraction. So this code is 5-1. 5-1 says the penalty is this, based upon this category. And they look, and that's the way it's handed. The sentence is handed. That, okay, based upon this code, this is the punishment. Now in common law, it's a bit different, just what we practice here. And it says legislative bodies enact less specific legal rules, giving judges, courts considerable authority in interpreting these rules based on precedent and other factors. So they may go to other cases and say, well, this case is different, but we can use a precedent because this case in 1945 said this. And this was the verdict of that case. Theocratic law is law that is based on religious text, religious document, and religious teachings. So, for example, you may have heard a lot about Sharia law, and a lot of people misinterpret what Sharia law is. They think it's just if you do this, they cut your head off. Or they, if you steal something, they whip you, or they cut your hand off if you're stealing, or if you commit adultery, they cut your nose off. And in this country, they look at it that way. They look at it as kind of draconian, very, very brutal way of treating individuals when there's an infraction. And so certainly they refer in the book to Islamic law, Iran and Saudi Arabia, which are Islamic governments. And it says the Quran views either the payment or receipt of interest as unlawful usury. Banks in a country like Iran cannot charge formal interest on loans they make or pay interest on deposits they receive. So interest in Islam is forbidden, or it is dealt with in a very different way. When you want to buy a house, there's a different method in how they deal with the payments, and it's not based on the interest that we would associate with mortgages here. So you have various laws that relate to when you talk about Islamic law, when you talk about religious law. But the Sharia law is very comprehensive, and it covers everything. It covers child support, it covers divorce, it covers property management, it covers all of the different social relations within that society and certain rulings. And of course, within the law, you have various types of laws that are listed here: criminal law, contract law, tax law, antitrust laws, product safety laws, dispute settlement or arbitration. These are all things that we know very well. And then what they do is they go through these and give you an idea of what they represent. And I believe we have an idea of what these laws are, particularly for antitrust. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 prohibited companies from developing virtual monopoly. So that is a very old piece of legislation. And it says monopoly is a situation where there is only a single seller of a product in an industry, and there are very high barriers to enter that market. It really isn't a single seller more than it is that seller having a dominant share of the market. So there can be other sellers, but you may have a dominant share of that market. You may have, say, a 70, 80% share of the market. And you can be considered a monopoly because of that. And if you form a group of companies, then that makes you an oligopoly, which is not illegal, but certainly it is what we saw in the Chiquita, Dole, and Del Monte case in Life and Debt. That's essentially what that was, and you see the problem with it. Okay. Intellectual property law, just a couple of things here as I move to this video that I want to show you. And we know about IP. They call it, if you become a lawyer, you'll hear about IP law, patents, which is an invention, trademarks, which can be logos or symbols or a representation of something. Copyrights can be rights to something creative, whether it be music, whether it be written material, a book, a poem, and so those are protected under international law. And there are various conventions that countries are members of that are supposed to protect products internationally. So there are certain treaties that are signed as a result of these legal standards. And as you can see there, the three types of IP. So what I'd like to do is show you this video. And this video is kind of humorous, but I think you will appreciate it. And it is one of those YouTube videos. And so I will cue it up.
Ninja Dolan. From everyone's favorite mighty mutant power turtles to the always refreshing Dr. Becker soft drink, we count 15 craptacular knockoff products from around the world. Number 15. Knockoff Starbucks. Nothing says capitalism, I mean America, like Starbucks coffee. The coffee house's chain has been a global powerhouse since the 1980s and has sprouted locations all over the world. But this hasn't stopped a whole slew of imitators from riding Starbucks coattails and trying to make a quick buck. Check out China's Sunbucks coffee, which uses the famous Starbucks logo design for its own selfish ends. Starbucks and Buckstar coffee commit the exact same crime, as does USA Bucks coffee, which I hear is in the running for a subtlety award. Starbucks has a long history of taking imitators to court, so you best think twice before opening that Snarbucks coffee joint. In 2014, Comedy Central's Nathan Fielder opened a Los Angeles coffee house called Dumb Starbucks Coffee. It caused quite a stir, but was ultimately revealed to be part of a television publicity stunt. The suits were not amused. Number 14. Imitation toys. They say imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, but there's not much that's flattering about these baffling toy knockoffs. Guaranteed to fall apart within a half hour of opening, these future junk heap liners spread disappointment wherever they are found. Check out New Style Ninja Tortoise, a bastardization of the I can't believe it's still going Ninja Turtles franchise. I'd hate to be the poor kid who opens this sucker at Christmas. Thanks for listening to me for the last 11 months, Dad. New Style Ninja Tortoise is just what I wanted. There's also the Mighty Mutant Power Turtles, which is what you would end up with when Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles drink too much wine together. The Star Wars franchise has some doozy knockoff toys too, including Laser Sword, which is like a lightsaber, only lamer, and Star Knight, which appears to be a Vader moonlighting as a camp scooter-tooting police officer. Very European. Finally, every unloved child should own a Robert Cop too. No, he's not Raymond's police officer brother from Everybody Loves Raymond, but he's just as surly. Number 13. Not quite right confectionery. Everybody loves to indulge in their favorite confectionery item, but sometimes you just don't feel like paying for those premium brand prices. You should though, cause imitation brands just aren't very good. Ask anyone who's traveled to Southeast Asia. They usually taste like cardboard, and you've got a 70% chance of fighting a syringe or band-aid when you reach into the packet. These knockoffs deserve points of creativity though. I mean, M&M ripoffs called S&Ms. Now that's a gateway candy. You've also got sour frittles, which on account of sounding like an STD, are a whole lot less appetizing. Oreos imitators are Boreos and cream betweens, which ooze pun potential. Interestingly, Oreos themselves are knockoffs of the original sandwich biscuit, Hydrox. But Hydrox sounds like a water boss in a Zelda game and is unmarketable. Thus, Oreos win. Number 12. Imitation butter knockoffs. The J.H. Filbert Company had no idea what a phenomenon their hilariously named butter substitute, I can't believe it's not butter, would create. I can't believe it's not was the pun of the 90s. It was referenced in countless sitcoms and sounds like something Chandler would have riffed on. They even had Fabio in their commercials. Just stellar stuff, guys. Of course, the imitators soon took notice, and along came the astonished English of unbelievable, this is not butter. Forgiveness, please. ASDA's fantabulous, you'd butter believe it, and Golden Soft's timid, unsure, could it be butter? Honorable mentions also include what? Not butter, and butter, it's not. Number 11. Imitation soft drinks. All around the world, small-scale beverage companies struggle in the sugary shadows of behemoths like the Coca-Cola Company. What's the little guy to do? Why, shamelessly replicate brand likeness, of course. To give you an idea of the sheer scope of these imitations, here's a list of international Mountain Dew knockoffs. Mountain Lightning, Mountain W, Mountain Rapids, Mountain Frost, Mountain Shoutin', Mountain Explosion, Mountain Lion, and Wild Mountain. Just reading them feels like I've climbed a mountain. Here's a similar list of Dr. Pepper, Dr. Bob, Dr. Thunder, Dr. Skipper, Dr. Fine Soda, Dr. Perky, Dr. Snap, Dr. Perfect, Dr. Becker, Dr. Bold, and Dr. Right. I'm not sure any of these are real doctors. I certainly wouldn't confide in Dr. Thunder or Dr. Right. Maybe Dr. Right. Pepsi is also kind of a crap knockoff of Coke, but that one's up for debate. Number 10. Skirple. Invented in 1964, Sharpies are the #1 permanent marker in the world. They're so iconic their name has become synonymous with the product as a whole. That's what Hoovers are to vacuum cleaners and aspirin is to paracetamol. Skirples are Chinese knockoffs that replicate the Sharpie packaging, but will probably bleed ink all over the insides of your bag. The name also sounds like an as-yet unidentified STD. Other Sharpie imitators include the Super Richeng, Goodwill's Super Superstar, and Hongbao's Super Stunyon. Number 9. Knockoff sportswear. Everyone wants to look cool when they're doubled over from a jog to the corner store, or running from their neighbor's frighteningly aggressive miniature fox terrier. Sportswear companies know this. It's why they set such exorbitant prices. They want you to work hard for their goods. They want you to sweat. It's no wonder then that consumers turn to imitation brand wear like Adidas, Heike, Knoverse, and Fuma. Their prices are comparatively low and can conveniently pick them up from your nearest black market. Sure, the quality leaves a lot to be desired, but who wants sneakers that last longer than 2 weeks? That's unnatural. Slap on that pimp hat, shameless reimagining of Puma, lace up those Ball Star classics and help out the little guy. If you're struggling to remain motivated, remember the high-key motto, just do that thing you said you would do. Number 8. Knockoff car designs. Copycat car design is a serious first world problem. It's also the root of many legal battles. Check out the Great Wall's Kula, which apes the slim, purely electric Renault Twizy, pretty much down to the last detail. And look, Attack of the Clones, the BAIC X424, gracefully borrows elements of Jeep's Wrangler and Cherokee, without saying thank you. This pandemic continues with the Geely GE, which made its motor show debut in 2009. Lawyers at Rolls-Royce no doubt salivated when the Phantom aping GE was unveiled. The GE replicates many of the Phantom's aesthetics, including its iconic upright grille. It was also set to retail for $220,000 less than its forerunner. Its striking likeness made it an attractive alternate for cheapskates. It could have really affected Rolls-Royce's sales if they'd just let it slide. Fortunately, Rolls-Royce's big strong lawyers hit the case and Geely was ordered to do a comprehensive redesign. Number 7. Mockbusters are low-budget imitations of popular Hollywood films. Made by small studios, their release dates closely follow those of the films they're ripping off. This insidious strategy works particularly well with children's films. The filmmakers obviously hope to profit from parents' confusion. Some of these knockoffs are hilariously shameless. Atlantic Rim apes 2013's Pacific Rim, Apocalypse Z reimagines World War Z, Transformers becomes Transmorphers, and Kung Fu Panda becomes Chop Kick Panda. Some bootlegs are hilariously bad too. Who can forget such classics as Pepe Likes Tacos? Number 6. Knockoff video game consoles. There's a rich tradition of knockoff video game consoles dating back to the early success of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Back then, video games were primarily for children, so it was easier for manufacturers to fool unsuspecting parents into buying their kids a brick gaming system. It's not all bad though. Some of these consoles can play or emulate retro games, sometimes from multiple systems. In lieu of buying genuine retro systems, this can be a cheap and easy way to experience game libraries from past systems. Still, for the most part, this is shameless money grabbing. These knockoff systems show how crazy cash-ins can become when copyright laws aren't enforced. Number 5. Knockoff electronics and appliances do big business, particularly in China and Taiwan. Manufacturers prey on consumer ignorance by copying the aesthetics and design choices of other well-known and respected products. These counterfeit devices are usually slow, buggy, poorly built, and cause immense frustration for the user. I mean, come on. Why can't my Nokia iPhone Galaxy 7 play Angry Birds? As with knockoff toys and movies, the impersonations are waver thin. In many cases, manufacturers barely go to any effort to create their abominations, nor do they obscure the fact they're ripping off multi-million-dollar companies' products. Check out the Obama-endorsed BlackBerry, the iPod Mini Swirl, and Hypnoho 6. It's lucky Homer knows a genuine Panaphonics when he sees one. Number 4. Fast food knockoffs. America's mighty fast food chains are admired and sloppily copied all over the world. Although the US and Iran have no diplomatic relations, some Iranian restaurant owners have tried to emulate American fast food franchises. Iran's Pizza Hut rips off Pizza Hut's menu and IT company Red Hat's logo all at once. Their McDonald's restaurant is the closest emulation of America's preeminent food empire, with locations in over 3 cities. McDonald's serves hamburgers and hot dogs, but curiously no mashed potato. McDonald's has many great imitators like McKebab and McDack, but China's Pizza is the place to go if you want your pizza garnished with herbs other than oregano. Number 3. Counterfeit fashion. Designer clothes are expensive. This is a fact of life. Knockoffs are cheap, but they're tacky, low quality, and usually manufactured in developing countries. Knockoff fashion creates a negative stigma, but some of it looks real enough that the consumer will risk exposure. It's a bit like the uncanny valley. Fake garments look nice only from afar. Overseas, fake watches and handbags sell like gangbusters. Tourists eat them up, hoping to project wealth and prosperity. We only have the Kardashians to blame. Counterfeit goods aren't subject to corporate quality control or government safety standards, so they could tear, fall apart, or even kill you. Online unscrupulous vendors have been taken advantage of bargain hunters by posting ads featuring beautiful dresses at a pittance. However, when the dresses arrive, they look nothing like the pictures. The proportions are often wrong, the craftsmanship is bad, and the fabric is almost never the same. The phenomenon is known as false advertising. Number 2. Imitation brand cereal disasters. Knockoff cereal brands reside on the lowest rungs of the supermarket breakfast aisle, a perfect eye level for confused toddlers. Their packages are bright and big, their cartoon mascots are terrifying, and their names are teasingly similar to more established cereal brands to evoke a connotation of quality. I wish the sun would rise right now so I could have a delicious bowl of circus balls. Number 1. Knockoff alcohol brand. Fake liquor is a growing and dangerous trade. Since it does not go through the usual rigorous commercial safety tests, counterfeit alcohol could be lethal to consume. In China, fake alcohol is made from bases that can strike the heart and kidneys, potentially cause blindness by attacking the retinal nerve. Fortunately, not all alcohol knockoffs are dangerous. Some are just no-frills versions of popular existing brands. Admiral Nelson is a cheaper knockoff of the popular Captain Morgan spice rum. Interestingly, the real Nelson and Morgan were mariners. Nelson was a British naval officer who died in battle during the Napoleonic Wars. In order to preserve his body on the boat ride home, they put him in a barrel of, you guessed it, rum. Think of that next time you wet your whistle with his namesake. Looking for other quality knockoff brand alcohol? Try John's Daphne's Old Time #1 brand quality tenderness sour mash whiskey, or Johnny Workers, who I think is the slower cousin of Johnny Walker, Pepexing Red Labial's Scotch whiskey. Yes, Labial. Don't know either. I hear it goes down smooth though. That's it for this countdown. Have a good one!